So this is one of those great days where we have one of our own members doing the talk. We know him, of course, as Fred, but in the great tradition of the United States Navy, he had a reputation that was too big for one name. And so, like John Paul Jones and David Glasgow Farragut, we have our own Alfred Scott McLaren. Now, he was a captain in the United States Navy. I made commander. We knew captains as the ones who were licensed to talk to God. I was also stationed far enough north in Canada to really respect the work that he did when he was commanding officer of Queenfish and doing serious Arctic surveying and research. It is cold up there. Even if the planet's getting warmer, it is cold up there. And so, as you may know, in the United States Navy, we have a tradition of not saluting when we don't have our uniforms on. But I'll tell you, this is a man who rates the salutes that he got, still rates the salute. Captain, you have the con in the deck.
Does that have a laser when you're on it? Okay, good. Thank you very much. This isn't an old war injury. I was bitten by an aardvark on the way here trying to get through that parking lot. And before I get going, I'm a Cambridge graduate, and we have one Oxford member here in the group, Doc Evans, and I'd appreciate it in the interest of helping the handicapped. And if he gets hung up on anything too technical, that you'll try and explain it to him. Okay, I'm going to be giving you a 50-minute talk in about 30 minutes, and I'm going to take all 30 minutes. And what I'm going to take you through very rapidly is the evolution of the Arctic submarine, or really the true submarine. And I apologize for the initial write-up. It looked like I was going to give you a very boring talk on the Arctic. But I think you're going to find this fascinating. Well, back in 1602, that was the idea of the Arctic Ocean. It was sort of surrounded by barriers of ice and maybe land. And maybe the land was there, maybe it wasn't. And you'd get past the ice and you could row in this nice warm water to the North Pole. And you could even maybe find land there. Nobody knew for sure just what on earth was up there. But anyway, the first real submarine that we knew about, I'm going to step down here in front, that actually got in the water, first to give us the name pig boats, was this submarine in the Thames River in 1620. It's made of cowhide. You push the oars through. And believe it or not, the designer and builder took James I of England out for a ride in the Thames River. And Doc, you know where the Thames is, I hope. And then, believe it or not, in 1648, Bishop John Wilkins, the founder of the Royal Society, wrote the first book on the Arctic submarine. His last chapter, he talked about designing a submarine ark capable of reaching the poles of the world. Very, very far-sighted. And then, of course, you see there a little better picture of the Arctic as we're starting to envision it. Then one of the very first U-boats. This is called the Incendiary Diver. Here's another version, the Sea Devil. Originally, they experimented with using cowhide for the pressure hull. That didn't work out very well with wooden frames. Finally, this, I think, is the first U-1, the first all-metal submarine. And then, of course, the Confederate Navy's Hunley, actually the first submarine to sink another ship in war, the Kearsarge, the Union Kearsarge. And then the Union Navy, the Alligator, who's one of several submarines that never seemed to get to sea. But I think you'll find it interesting to look at some of these shapes, because eventually we come back. to these streamlined shapes in later years. And then Jules Verne's Nautilus in 1889, of course, 69, this really started to excite interest in submarines and taking a submarine to the pole. And then John Holland built the Navy's first submarine, the S-1. But he's also famous in 1881 for designing and building the Fenian Ram, which he was trying to build for the Fenian Society, that is the U.S. version of the IRA, to harass the British with it. And then Simon Lake in 1896 took out the first patent, believe it or not, for an under-ice submarine. Had some nice features like wheels and things like that. And we're starting to know a little bit more about the Arctic. About this time, it's being envisioned as a vast paleocrystic sea, unchanged since the beginning of time. I always thought that was hilarious. So if somebody left something up there 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, it'd still be there. And then Professor Anschutz Kampf designed these two submarines, the Forelle, which means trout, and the Carp. And believe it or not, and the year is only 1902, he came up with the most accurate estimate it would be like in the Arctic Ocean, the Arctic Basin. And certainly in my last trip in 1970, it was almost like he predicted, believe it or not. Unfortunately, the German government lost interest and these didn't get built. Then Simon Lake, back to building submarines. He designed a submarine, the Protector, took it to sea in Newport, Rhode Island, operated under the ice for about a half hour and brought most of that ice back to port with him. And then the Kefil, which means mullet, what a lousy name for a submarine. A Russian submariner, traveled under ice for about an hour and 32 minutes off Vladivostok. So that's really our first fairly lengthy under ice trip. And then Perry, of course, achieved the North Pole. And then interest sort of fell with regard to reaching the North Pole for a while. But in the meantime, Sir Hubert Wilkins, the first to make a lengthy flight in the Antarctic, the first to make a lengthy flight in the Arctic, bought a World War I submarine from the U.S. government for $1, had it converted, and here was the technology. Notice the bumper here on the front. In case you ran into an iceberg, you could bump it away. You see the sort of sled runner on top. And I'll show you in a minute. This housed a 39-inch manually operated drill. Technically, you could drill your way through 13 feet of ice. And the idea was, in those days, and believe it or not, right up to about the late 60s, many people thought the ice was perfectly flat underneath. So his idea was you'd skate along on that sled under this flat ice, and then when your battery got low, you would drill through the ice and bring in air for your diesel engine and for your ventilation. And notice here's that 39-inch drill with polar bears waiting for lunch to emerge when he gets up there. Well, this actually got to sea in late August 1931. And on the day they're to make the plunge under the ice, he really hoped to go from one side to the other via the North Pole. They did a final inspection, and my God, the stern planes, which controls your depth, they had removed the bow planes before they modified the submarines, had been removed. Out and out sabotage. Needless to say, the crew was a little bit disturbed by this, but he somehow talked them in to making a try under ice by sort of balancing the submarine. They got stuck under ice for about 4 hours. During this time, the crew mutinied, and just by luck, they got back out. They headed for Norway, scuttled it in the Norwegian fjord, and this really set back Arctic submarining a little bit. Then 1937, you had a Russian D-class submarine And the Denmark Strait between Greenland and Iceland operated under ice. And then, of course, World War II. And there you see Admiral Donitz. And every summer, he had as many as maybe 6 submarines operating here in the Norwegian Sea, the Barents Sea, almost all the way to the other end of the Kara Sea, the Laptev Sea. Every summer of World War II, he had submarines operating up there to attack the convoys going to Murmansk or Archangel. And here you see one of the most famous skippers, Captain Lang of U-711, who was up there for 4 straight years. It didn't really sink much. And he later rose to the rank of admiral in the post-German Navy after World War II. Then the U.S. almost immediately, I think, recognizing who our next enemy might be, started sending our World War II submarines up to test things out. And there you see the Atul in 1946 firing torpedoes on an iceberg. Well, the results were predictable. Nothing happened. And then the famous Dr. Waldo line, I'll tell you more about him. He designed the under ice equipment for all submarines, including nuclear submarines, right up to the time he died in about 2003. He took the submarine Boarfish up, operated in the Chukchi Sea, that is between Alaska and Siberia. And we started sending submarines up there every summer. My 2 sons were Marines, and I have a grandson now that's just commissioned. And I've always liked to show this slide, because the concept was you would carry a small contingent of Marines comfortably situated in this ice-increased case and land them in Korea. Great place to put your teenagers, too. And then this is an unusual submarine, the Redfish. And in the summers of 1952-53, they actually came up through the Bering Strait. And what we did is called Polinia hopping, going under the ice, coming up in open lakes of water, and just going from one to the other, all the way to the Alaskan or Canadian coast. Quite a feat. And then the great, we used to call them the COG, the kindly old gentleman, Admiral Rickover. I worked for him for 22 years. No, he's not smiling in any of those pictures. And the first Arctic submarine, the first true submarine, that is one that can stay submerged indefinitely, Uss Nautilus, launched in 1954. And of course, during the summer of 58, it went from the Pacific to the Atlantic via the North Pole. There you see the route, came in here through very shallow water. It actually was her 3rd try. She tried in 57, couldn't make it, had to make 2 tries before she could get under the thick ice right here, straight to the other side. Here you see Dr. Waldo Lyon and Commander Bill Anderson, the skipper. And that's the first under ice topography recorded, and you can see it's anything but flat. Back in 1931, if Sir Hubert Wilkins had gotten under that, we wouldn't see him until global warming had completed its course. And of course, Nautilus really got a hero's welcome in New York City, the ticker parade, the whole works. Then close on the heels of Nautilus, hoping to beat Nautilus to the pole, was the Skate, who actually was the first to surface the North Pole on the 11th of August, 1958. And then the Skate returned the following winter. On St. Patrick's Day of 59, they surfaced through thick ice. Sir Hubert Wilkins, as you remember, in 1931, he had died, and they distributed his ashes at the North Pole. And then the Sargo, this in my mind is the most dangerous trip ever made. The first and really only all-winter trip. From Pearl Harbor, they came up through Bering Strait. They regularly surfaced through 4 feet of ice and managed to get back, but just barely. They collided with the ice on the way back. And even though this is hard steel. Look what it did to the top of the sail. They were lucky to get back. Then this is the first trip I went on as a young officer of the Sea Dragon. And we were unusual. I joined it about 2 months before they departed to go to their new home port from Portsmouth to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. And we're the only submarine to ever spend a week looking at the underside of icebergs. A very unhealthy thing to do. This is about 308 feet above the surface, reaching more than 1,000 feet beneath the surface. And believe it or not, that profile of Teddy Roosevelt was actually there. So we examined the underside of about 32 icebergs. Never ever been done again. And then we did the first survey of the entire Northwest Passage, found a good deep route all the way through. From there up to the North Pole, Bering Strait to our home port, Hawaii. Many of our crew got this tattooed on their left arm. There you see me as a young buck there as diving officer. Several other things occurred. I took this picture up there. There's always open water at the North Pole in the summer. We put the very first scuba divers in the water at the North Pole. And there you see what the underside of the ice looks like. And then on the 25th of August, we played the first game of baseball ever played at the North Pole. The pitcher's mound was located at our best estimate of the North Pole, and the bases were oriented such that if you hit a home run, you circumnavigated the globe. If you hit the ball into right field and went across the international date line into tomorrow, the right field caught it. Fielder caught it, he could throw it back into yesterday. And as you can imagine, anybody here that's played baseball, sliding took on new meaning. You could hit your base and go another 20 or 30 feet beyond it. And by the time the game was over, we couldn't figure out what day it started or ended. And that baseball is in the Baseball Hall of Fame. And my second book, Silent and Unseen, about a third of that is devoted to the trip. Then the Russians sent their first submarine up, the Leninsky Komsomol, a November-class attack submarine. And they sent another one up in '63. And unfortunately, I think it was 1997, I wanted to honor all the first skippers who've been to the North Pole. Honored the first 4 skippers at the Explorers Club. We had a special dinner for them. But when we tried to track down these 2 skippers, the shielding was so poor that most of those crews had died of radiation poisoning by 1997. Then the first rendezvous at the North Pole, the Sea Dragon and the Skate. Then we had the tragic loss of 2 nuclear submarines, the Thresher and the Scorpion. That slowed things down as we really re-examined questions of submarine safety. But in the meantime, we were building the first of a class of submarines, all 37 of which would have the capability of operating in the Arctic or the Antarctic year-round. I was lucky enough to be the second in command or executive officer of the first of these to go to sea, the USS Queenfish. They wouldn't do it now, but just a month and a half after commissioning, we took it north of the Arctic Circle and tested out all its features, including breaking through the ice. And then 2 more of that class in 1969 went up to the Arctic Ocean, the North Pole. The Whale in particular, now you see one of the features, what we call the sailplanes. You could rotate it at a 90-degree position for breaking through as much as 2 meters of ice. Now, when I had command, I hated to break through the ice. If any of you in here hate the sound of chalk on a blackboard, it's about 1 million times that as you go up through this ice. Then the Russians are already Soviets sending submarines from one ocean to the other by the Siberian Shelf. There you see an attack boat and one of their early ballistic missile boats. And then I came back to Queenfish, thanks to Admiral Rickover, a submarine that I'd spent 2 years building, known it from the time it was a keel, and I was reassigned to be commanding officer of it for 4 years. It was absolutely wonderful because I knew it like the back of my hand. There you see us at the North Pole, and there you see me with the Hawaiian state flag at the North Pole. And here was basically the trip. We had the last major piece of exploration to do. And at that time, I already had a couple of degrees relating to climate change, and I proposed that we retrace Nautilus's trip, same day, same position, 12 years later, determine how much the ice had changed in 12 years, then surveyed the extension of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge to see if it was tectonically active, and then for the first time in history, eased down and surveyed under ice the entire 3,600 nautical miles of the entire Siberian continental shelf. We loaded out for about 180 days. I basically was told not to come back until we finished the survey. Certainly an exciting trip I'd never want to repeat. And you had all kinds of strange things to worry about. Of course, the survey started about in here and all the way across. And at that time, we're talking about 1970, the Soviets were convinced there was a submerged continent there called Sannikov land. But we never found it. And of course, there was the possibility of finding all kinds of new islands, everything. This is a very exciting day. Just come to periscope depth. Just got the periscope around, and there, 30 feet away, is a female polar bear who couldn't believe her luck. She reared up, and I had the crosshairs right on her nose. She started swimming rapidly towards us. I guess she thought we were some kind of seal. And the idle thought as she got this close, how on earth am I going to explain teeth marks in my periscope when I get back to port? And that's the first time we saw the two cubs. And then my first book, Unknown Waters, was written on this trip. I know there's some non-believers, but there he is, and you better be good. I think it's tomorrow night you better be good. Then following us was the Hammerhead, who did the first survey between Greenland and the Canadian archipelago. Went all the way up on that narrow stretch. And then the first British submarine, the Royal Navy submarine in '71, the Dreadnought. And look at this, between 1957 and '71, these were all the areas in a previously uncharted area surveyed by U.S. nuclear submarines. Here you get a good idea how close we got in on that survey, Siberian Shelf Survey. Then another British submarine, the Sovereign, in '76. Then some more of the same class that I commanded, the Gurnard, the first one to spend a winter in the Beaufort Sea. And then we started seeing Russian nuclear submarines operating there. There you see an attack boat, the Victor class. And when I was a lab commander, we supported the Archerfish going up between the Canadian archipelago and Greenland. I have to chuckle when people worry about sending women aboard submarines. This was one of 3 female engineers we had on board. Spent about a month on board, had no difficulty whatsoever. She's still smiling. The other thing we did is we fired torpedoes under ice, and then, as you see, recovered them from under the ice. Then we started sending them up 2 at a time. There you see 2 more of the same class, the Aspro and the Tautog in '82. I like this shot because that's a laser communication. Mendel Rivers. We started changing the names of submarines to people. And I asked Admiral Rickover one time, why did you do that? And he said, because fish don't vote. Then we sent 3 submarines of that same class up in '86. Following year, 2 U.S. submarines of that same class. This is the Queenfish, the Sturgeon class, and the Royal Navy submarine. Then the Russians put 6 of these to sea, the Typhoon class SSBN. And I think most of you have seen The Hunt for Red October. This is the submarine that was commanded by Sean Connery in that. They're all decommissioned now for some reason. And the Honolulu, and this is very exciting for them, these very curious polar bears. And this one here, he actually tastes the rudder. He tries to bite the rudder. They think, boy, this is one big seal. And then more of the Russian ballistic missile submarines. This is the Delta IV class. They generally did their patrols up in the Arctic Ocean, but they had to surface in the Polinias open lakes of water to fire missiles. We now know that the latest versions, and I'll show you one towards the end, can fire from a couple of 100 feet beneath the surface of the water now. Then the brand new Akula class attack boat, all Arctic capable. This is the Connecticut, one of 3 of a super class, the Seawolf class. These are the years she went up there. All capable of breaking through quite a bit of ice. A Royal Navy skipper, understand he really liked his drink while he was up there. And the Texas. Now this is one of the brand new Virginia class attack boat. You see that, and they've broken through the ice, various pictures of them. The New Hampshire, another of the Virginia class, there'd be about 44 boats in that class. And then the Connecticut class is there's just 3, the Seawolf, the James Carter, and the Connecticut. And about this time, now we're getting about 2010 now, the Russians are making their second try on the 3rd law of the sea treaty to try and get all this extra territory judged as belonging to them, including the North Pole. There you see the 200-mile limit. We're claiming this area, and the Soviets are arguing with the Norwegians about this. And what's coming, of course, is global warming and the coming importance of these sea routes up in the Arctic Ocean. In the meantime, the Russians are really building submarine bases in and around the Arctic. And they're starting to really exert a presence up there. There's a cruise missile firing submarine, the Oscar class. It can carry about 18 or 20 cruise missiles, and they're very deadly to aircraft carriers. Predicted life of an aircraft carrier if we went to war after hostilities started is about 30 minutes. And then this is a titanium submarine they designed, built, put to sea in 2012, used solely for Arctic resource exploration. Supposedly they can actually drill while they're under ice. Supposedly you can go several thousand feet beneath the ice, but they're using for exploration and searching for resources in the Arctic. Then the Kilo class, this is a non-nuclear submarine that can stay submerged close to 4 weeks, extremely quiet, under ice capable. There's about 44 of these built now. And then this is the brand new Yasin class, which is about as quiet as our quietest submarines. It's a real challenge now. This is the brand new ballistic missile submarine that can fire deep underwater. 4 of these are built, great favor of Putin's. And to counter all this, we have the Los Angeles class, about 20 of those left, 3 of the Seawolf, and there'll be a total of about 40 to 44 of the brand new Virginia class. And then we have a new class on the design board now. So just this last March, we had one of the Hartford, the Virginia class, and the Connecticut from the Seawolf class. So we have a constant presence up there. I'd say the total trips we've made up in the Arctic Ocean exploration is close to 200 now. This is the way the Arctic Ocean looks now with all this exploration. And this is the area we're battling with the Russians. They're hoping, they're trying again with the 3rd law of the sea treaty to claim all this. We're countering them. You remember they made a dive with a Russian near submersible North Pole. And here's a stamp that came out with the Russian flag, which they planted at the North Pole. And this is the new Cold War that's coming. Thank you very much. Now, what I was trying to do in this talk is have this be the worst place you could be on a Friday afternoon in Boulder, Colorado.
Wow, Captain McLaren, thank you so much. It is a career, an adventure, a spirit of exploration that I can only imagine. And I think I join everyone here in admiring you and what you have done. In your honor, the Boulder Rotary Club is pleased to contribute 100 doses of vaccine to the Polio Plus Fund. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.